What if the man who laid hands on you every Sunday was the same man who pointed a gun at you on Friday night? The question had haunted Mama Ajike since that fateful evening. She had stared down the barrel of a pistol, trembling, her hands raised, as her attacker barked commands in a voice oddly familiar. Not until days later, when she sat on the third pew of Mount Zion Revival Chapel and listened to Pastor Elisha command the demon of poverty to flee in Jesus' name, did the chilling realization settle in her bones. She knew that voice. But let's not rush. This tale does not begin with a gunshot or a scream. It begins with silence, the kind that hangs over forgotten towns where secrets fester like old wounds. The town of Ugweek was one such place. Nestled between two aging hills and straddled by a river that knew the taste of many sins, Ugweek was quiet in the way graveyards are. People spoke in low tones, smiled with tight lips, and clapped half-heartedly in churches. Life moved on rails of routine until Pastor Elisha came. He arrived during the harmattan, when dust choked the roads and the air smelt like burnt leaves. Tall, dark, and soft-spoken, Elisha Obinna was unlike any clergyman the town had known. He didn't just preach, he performed. His sermons burned like firewood. His voice stirred both fear and comfort. In months, he turned the crumbling chapel with broken benches and a cracked altar into a cathedral of miracles. Offerings overflowed. The sick were healed. Wombs opened. Even hardened criminals wept at the altar. Women called him daddy, men saluted him with reverence, and children reached for the hem of his agbada like he was the second coming of Christ. But what the people didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that when the sun dipped behind Ugweek's hills and the last hallelujah faded, Pastor Elisha shed his collar, slipped on a black hoodie, and vanished into the night. By day, he was the shepherd of souls. By night, he hunted wallets, jewels, and secrets. There was a reason he always insisted the church services end before 6:30 p.m. sharp. 2 a.m., the silent road. The town's main road was a narrow strip of worn asphalt stretching like a scar across the sleeping community. On most nights, it was silent. But tonight, the silence broke under the hiss of motorcycle tires slicing through the cool darkness. A lone Okada zoomed past, its passenger dressed head to toe in black, his face masked but his eyes alert and calculating. 3 blocks down from the market junction, the motorcycle slowed and stopped near a one-story building, the home of Chief Agata, a retired commissioner known for keeping his safe stocked like a local bank. The night air was thick. A dog barked in the distance and was abruptly silenced. Elisha moved with the ease of a man who had done this many times.
Gloves on.
Gun loaded. Mind calm. He wasn't here to kill, just to take what the devil had handed to the undeserving. That was how he justified it. The wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, he often quoted in his mind. The irony was not lost on him. The robbery was clean. Chief Agata, half-drunk, barely put up a fight. Elisha had been watching him for weeks, knew when he came home, when his guard switched shifts, and where the backup keys were hidden. He tied the man to a chair with a belt and left with 2 duffel bags of cash, a wristwatch worth more than a car, and a strange gold necklace that felt cursed. By 3:15 a.m., he was back in his apartment, a humble 2-bedroom flat the church had rented for him. He washed, prayed, and slept like a baby. At dawn, his alarm rang. By 6 a.m., he was in a white kaftan, oiling his palms and preparing for morning glory prayers. Mount Zion Revival Chapel sat at the edge of town, surrounded by dying mango trees and stories of resurrection. The congregation was packed that morning. The choir swayed in unison, sweat glistening on their foreheads as they belted songs of deliverance. Children fidgeted, ushers barked softly, and fans flapped like anxious butterflies. Then he entered. Pastor Elisha walked in slowly, Bible pressed to his chest, his face glowing like Moses descending from Sinai. The crowd erupted, cheering, clapping, some weeping. Nobody noticed the faint scar under his chin, still red from a night scrape with Chief Agata's broken window. Nobody except Mama Ajike. She watched him from the third pew, her heart pounding. The way he moved, the echo of his voice, the sharpness in his eyes. She was beginning to doubt her own sanity. Was it even possible? Could a man of God live such a double life? He climbed the pulpit and shouted, "Today, we're breaking generational curses." The congregation roared. A man with many faces. What no one knew was that Pastor Elisha was once just Elisha Obinna, a young man from the outskirts of Onitsha whose father had died in prison and whose mother sold bread on the roadside until a trailer took her life. At 16, he joined a gang to survive. By 20, he had mastered the art of breaking into warehouses. But it was during one of those robberies that fate played its cruel hand. He was caught, shot in the leg, left for dead. A traveling preacher found him and nursed him back to health. The man taught him the Bible, taught him how to speak with conviction. Elisha listened. He learned, but he never truly let go of his old self. Instead, he wore his past like an inner garment, hidden but ever-present. The pulpit gave him power, but the night gave him control. The beginning of a storm. That Sunday service would be the last peaceful one. Because 2 nights later, something changed. Someone followed him. He didn't know it yet, but a boy from the choir, Samuel, barely 19, had noticed something strange about the pastor's routine. He had seen Elisha leave the compound late at night and return before dawn. Curious, he decided to follow. He trailed him on his bicycle, staying far enough to avoid suspicion. What Samuel saw that night would steal his sleep for weeks. It wasn't just the robbery. It was the rage in Pastor Elisha's eyes, the way he slapped a man across the face with the butt of his pistol, the way he laughed darkly as he left. Samuel went back to his room and cried. He was torn. Should he tell someone? Would anyone believe him? It's one thing to know the truth. It's another to carry it like a stone on your chest, day and night, while everyone else sings praises to a lie. Samuel could no longer sleep in peace. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Pastor Elisha's face under the streetlight, hard, sharp, nothing like the man who blessed communion wine. He saw the pistol, heard the terrified voice of the man being robbed, and worst of all, the calm laughter of the man people called Daddy in the Lord. He had seen enough to send Elisha to prison for life. But who would believe him? Samuel was no one. Just a lean, quiet boy who joined the church choir to get free food after services and feel less alone. He had no father. His mother was a vegetable seller who still beat him for skipping evening prayers. He had never spoken to Elisha directly. And now, the weight of a dangerous truth pressed on his 16-year-old soul like a grindstone. Every day he went to church, he watched the pastor from the shadows. Elisha didn't look nervous, didn't flinch. His voice never cracked. His sermon still cut through the air like a sharpened blade. Miracles were still happening, or at least people claimed they were. But Samuel knew something had changed. He noticed the way the pastor sometimes paused mid-sentence, as though listening for something no one else could hear. He noticed how he now glanced more often at the windows during service, how his eyes lingered on unfamiliar faces in the crowd, and how he once asked the security man, "Has anyone been loitering near my house?" The hunter was beginning to sense a trap. The confession journal. Unable to speak to anyone, Samuel began writing. Every night, by candlelight, he opened an old exercise book and poured out everything he had seen, the clothes Elisha wore, the way he moved, the roads he took, the houses he visited. It was a secret journal, hidden under his mattress and sealed with layers of fear. He called it the truth they will never believe. In it he wrote, "Pastor Elisha is not who they think he is. I saw him hold a gun. I saw him steal. He beat a man and took a bag of money. He laughed like someone who knew God wasn't watching. I don't know what to do with this. Maybe I'll die with it. But if anything happens to me, let this book speak." Each word was written with trembling hands. Each sentence was a rebellion against the fear that was now choking his every breath. The wrong sermon. It was the first Sunday of the new month, and Mount Zion was packed. A guest pastor was supposed to minister that day, but Elisha changed the plan last minute. He mounted the pulpit with fire in his eyes and declared, "There is a Judas in our midst." The crowd gasped. He continued, The Lord showed me. Someone among us is hiding. Someone is planting evil seeds, spying, scheming, planning destruction. But I serve a living God. Their evil will return to them sevenfold. Amens filled the room. But Samuel, seated in the third row of the choir stand, nearly fainted. His heart thudded like a war drum. Was Elisha talking about him? Had he been seen? Followed? He looked around, but no one noticed him. Yet Elisha's eyes lingered on him for a second too long, too sharp, too deliberate. From that moment, Samuel knew. He was no longer safe. The visit at night. 3 days later, just before midnight, someone knocked on the door of their one-room apartment. Samuel's mother was still awake, pounding yam in the backyard for her early morning sales. She shouted, "Samuel, go and check." When he opened the door, 2 tall men stood outside, dressed in black. They smiled too politely. "Good evening. You be Samuel, ABI?" "Yes, who are you?" "We just want to ask you small question." "Come outside small." His feet froze. "I don't understand," he whispered. One of them leaned in. "No worry. Pastor Elisha say, make we invite you come. Say him want pray for you specially." Samuel shut the door without replying, his legs weak with panic. He rushed to the back of the house and whispered everything to his mother. She didn't understand the danger, but she sensed something was wrong. "Go inside and sleep. Tomorrow we go ask the pastor what day happen." But Samuel knew there might be no tomorrow. The escape. That night, Samuel packed a bag, just clothes, his journal, and a small phone with no airtime. By 2 a.m., when the compound was silent, he climbed through the back window and vanished into the bush path behind the house. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to leave Ugweek, far from the eyes of a man who wore the Bible like a mask. Pastor Elisha's paranoia. By the following morning, Pastor Elisha was pacing his room, shirtless,
sweaty,
the curtains drawn. He had sent his boys to find the boy and return him, quietly. But now, the boy had disappeared, vanished. "This boy will bring fire," Elisha muttered to himself. He stared at his altar, the little shrine in his room disguised as a prayer corner. It was there he often knelt, not always to pray, but sometimes to ask the dark gods of his past life for protection. His Christianity was part real, part role.
He believed in God, yes.
But he also believed in power. And right now, he was losing it. The boy had to be found. No loose ends. A stranger in Abosi. Samuel's journey took him 2 towns away to Abosi. There, he found refuge in an abandoned mechanic's shed and begged food from roadside vendors. Each day, he looked over his shoulder. Each night, he read his journal and added more lines, fears, prayers, names. Then one day, fate stepped in. He saw a small radio station office near the bus park with a poster that read, "Speak the truth. Change the world." It gave him an idea.
The studio smelled of old wires, cheap coffee, and stories too dangerous for newspapers. At the far end of the room sat Mr. Collins, the host of Voices of the Street, a low-budget morning radio show that catered to local issues in Abosi and its surrounding villages. His desk was cluttered with CDs, dusty microphones, and worn notebooks filled with half-told confessions. When Samuel walked in that afternoon, he looked like every other street kid, thin, dusty, eyes too tired for his age. "I have something important," the boy said, gripping his school bag tightly. Collins barely looked up. "We don't do missing person announcements after 12. "It's not that," Samuel said, stepping closer. "I need to tell the truth about a pastor. Pastor Elisha Obinna. From Ugweek." That name made Collins lift his head. "What about him?" "He's not who they think he is," Samuel said quietly. "I've seen him rob people. At night. With a gun." The interview. Samuel sat before the microphone, his fingers trembling. He hadn't eaten since morning. His voice cracked with nervousness. But Collins saw something raw in him, something real. "I need proof," Collins said, pointing at the dusty microphone. Samuel pulled out his journal. Pages filled with dates, places, and memories. It was crude, handwritten, but damning. Collins read silently for 5 minutes. Then, without another word, he turned on the mic and began to record. What followed was a 30-minute interview like no other. Samuel spoke of that night near Chief Agata's house. He described the hoodie, the pistol, the laughter. He talked about following the pastor on multiple occasions and how no one believed him. He cried while reading his journal aloud. When the recording ended, Collins leaned back in his chair. "This is heavy," he whispered. Collins didn't air the full interview right away. He edited out the boy's full name but left enough to spark curiosity. The following morning, his show opened with a teaser. "What if your pastor was also your neighborhood robber?" A boy from Ugweek claims he followed his church leader and saw more than miracles. Is this the truth, or a deadly lie? Hear it yourself at 8 a.m. The phones lit up. By the time the segment aired, word had reached Ugweek. Some people listened in silence. Others dismissed it as an attack from the devil. But Pastor Elisha was not silent. Elisha heard the broadcast while having tea in his study. His hand froze mid-sip. The voice on air was familiar, young, frightened, unmistakable. Samuel. His worst fear had come true. Within minutes, his phone buzzed non-stop. Church elders were calling. Members were whispering. His loyal boys were texting, "Oga, should we handle it?" "No," he replied, trying to stay calm. "Let me think." That afternoon, he held an emergency meeting with the board. He wore white, quoted Psalms, and declared it a spiritual attack on the church. "These are the end times," he said, shaking his head. "The enemy is raising false witnesses." Some nodded. Some hesitated. But one elder, Brother Ikenna, spoke up. "Sir, they say the boy mentioned a journal. Dates. Details. Can you swear before God that none of it is true?" Elisha stared at him. Silence fell. He smiled faintly. "Brother Ikenna, doubt is a sin." But doubt was already spreading. That night, Elisha sent 2 of his trusted boys to Abosi. They carried cash, burner phones, and a mission: find the boy. Silence him. Recover the journal. In Abosi, Collins received anonymous calls threatening his life. A stone was thrown through his studio window with a note that read, "Burn the tape or be buried with it." Samuel had to be moved. With help from Collins and a local NGO, he was relocated to Aka under a fake name. There, in a small shelter, he stayed hidden, while Collins prepared the next broadcast, a full exposé with Samuel's voice, journal entries, and a recorded conversation with one of Elisha's former boys who had just confessed. The truth was now a ticking bomb. Back in Ugweek, things were crumbling. People stopped coming to church. Some mothers forbade their children from attending Sunday school. Elders argued behind closed doors. Elisha stood on the altar the next Sunday, thunder in his voice. "If you believe lies over the word of your pastor," he shouted, "you were never part of this house." But fewer amens answered him. He began preaching longer, louder, as if volume could drown guilt. But the truth had planted itself like a seed. It only needed time. How far can a lie stretch before it snaps? Pastor Elisha sat behind his polished mahogany desk in the church office, hands folded, jaw clenched. The air inside was stiff. Outside, the compound that once echoed with praises and hand claps was now uncomfortably quiet. The second broadcast had aired. This time, they played full segments of Samuel's voice, raw, unedited. His words were unmistakable, and the details he provided about the robberies had begun matching some unsolved police cases from the past 2 years. The police were no longer ignoring it. A quiet investigation had begun. In Aka, Samuel stayed hidden behind the concrete fence of a youth shelter run by the non-profit Safe Hearts. He had changed his haircut, wore a different name tag, and rarely stepped outside. But inside, he burned with both fear and strange relief. He had done it. He had pulled the veil off a monster. Yet he wasn't at peace. Each night, he kept hearing the pastor's voice, "The Lord will silence every false prophet." He wondered, had I done enough? Should I go back and face him? Let the people see both of us side by side, truth versus deception? The thought lingered, growing louder with each sleepless night. Elisha paced. 3 of his board members had stepped down quietly. Church tithes had dropped by almost 60%. Police had invited him to answer some questions about a robbery in Umeaz. He had smiled, given them a holy wave, and promised to come, but hadn't. His influence was cracking. He called a private meeting with his closest men. 10 sat in the back of the church at 9 p.m., curtains drawn, phones off. "There are 2 kinds of war," Elisha began. "The one you pray through, and the one you eliminate." One of the boys cleared his throat. "Oga, this one done pass prayer oh." Elisha nodded. "Then let's plan for the second. The assassin's offer." In the dim backroom of a bar in Nui, a man named Ikechukwu, known on the streets as Ike the Fixer, sat sipping cold beer as Elisha's messenger slid into the seat across from him. "I need him gone," the messenger whispered. "How clean?" "No trace." Ike chuckled. "That boy, the one on radio?" "Yes." "Too hot. But for 3 million, I can make him vanish." The message was passed back to Elisha, who hesitated. 3 million was not pocket change. But it was either that, or risk everything falling apart. He nodded once. "Do it." A return no one expected. But Samuel had made his own decision. He would return to Ugweek, not secretly, not quietly, but openly. Not to hide, not to whisper. But to walk in truth. He called Collins. "I want to go back," Samuel said. "You're not safe," Collins warned. "This man has people who can harm you." "I'm not alone," Samuel replied. "People believe me now." And indeed, some did. Survivors of unsolved attacks began stepping forward. A former church worker confessed that Pastor Elisha often disappeared at night and returned with foreign currency and strange bruises. The tide was turning. So Collins contacted a friend in the local press, who reached out to police. A small convoy of journalists and officers accompanied Samuel back to Ugweek for an impromptu press conference. It was time. The showdown. On a hot Friday morning, crowds gathered at the community center. The boy many once called mad now stood with a microphone in his hand. Collins stood beside him, along with officers, reporters, and curious villagers. Samuel opened his journal and read aloud. "I followed him that night because something felt wrong. And what I saw changed everything. I was afraid, yes. But silence would have made me guilty too." He paused, scanning the crowd. Then, as if the universe planned it, a black SUV pulled up, and Pastor Elisha stepped out. White Igbada. Dark glasses. But his swagger had cracks now. People gasped. 2 policemen immediately moved toward him. One whispered, "Sir, you're under investigation. We need you to come with us." Elisha laughed. "Me? You arrest pastors now?" But he didn't resist. Not yet. The fence begins to splinter. As they led him away, murmurs filled the air. "Is it true? Pastor? A thief? God forbid." But seeds had already been planted. 3 women came forward that day with testimonies of night attacks that matched Samuel's descriptions. An old security guard swore he once saw someone climb over the church fence at 1 a.m. wearing clothes suspiciously like Pastor Elisha's jogging attire. And then came the bank footage, an old clip of a masked man robbing an ATM, grainy. blurry. But Collins spotted something: the man's walk. The slight limp. The hand gestures. It was enough to raise suspicion. The flock without a shepherd. By Sunday, Mount Zion Church was empty. The pulpit was cold. The offering baskets remained untouched. Bibles gathered dust. Choir members stood in disbelief, unsure whether to rehearse or resign. The truth had arrived like a windstorm. Uninvited. Relentless. And the man they once called Daddy had finally been stripped of his mask. They brought him in just after noon, no sirens, no cameras, no cuffs. Pastor Elisha sat in the plain, tiled room of the Anambra State CID headquarters in Aka, still dressed in white, though now without the glint of his Rolex or the covering of holy titles. His hands were folded on the table, eyes calm, lips curved into a faint, amused smile. But Inspector Mba wasn't smiling. He sat across the table, a lean man with sharp cheekbones and sharp instincts. "We've reviewed the broadcast," the inspector began. "The journal entries. The testimony from your former church driver. We just need you to help us make sense of it." Elisha tilted his head. "Make sense of what? You want a pastor to explain lies told by a confused child?" Mba said nothing. He placed a clear bag on the table. Inside it was a handgun. Serial number, partially scratched off. Elisha's smile faltered. "The firearm," Mba said slowly, "was recovered from the gutter behind Mount Zion Church compound. We received an anonymous tip." "Want to guess who gave it?" Elisha didn't respond. "We ran a partial match," the inspector continued. 3 bullets from this gun match casings found at robbery scenes in Inugwaku, Aji River, and Umoji. No prints, but it's registered to a man who disappeared 2 years ago." Still, Elisha didn't speak. But his fingers, once steady, began tapping lightly on the desk. A rhythmless tremble. A silent scream. Meanwhile, back in Ugweek, the church gates remained padlocked. A few loyalists still tried to defend their leader. Elder Deborah, long considered Elisha's spiritual mother, wept on live radio, declaring the devil had hijacked the narrative. "This is a spiritual battle," she said. Even Christ was betrayed by his own. But more people were speaking out. One middle-aged man confessed that his wife had once seen Elisha inside a compound he later claimed he had never entered. A young woman said she saw the pastor change clothes behind the vestry one late night, only to later find those same clothes discarded near the church with blood on the sleeve. And then came the biggest blow. A quiet man named Obiora, formerly part of Elisha's Midnight Men, walked into the CID office and handed over a notebook of his own. Inside were dates, addresses, and maps. Elisha sat through 5 hours of questioning. He denied everything. "I have enemies," he said again and again. "People envy my ministry. They want to destroy the church. These boys are being paid to lie." But Obiora's notebook had too much detail. One particular map pointed to a house in Ajadai that had been hit during a nighttime break-in. In that incident, the guard had described the leader of the gang as speaking fluent Igbo with biblical references, calling his pistol "my rod and my staff." Exactly the way Elisha had once joked during a sermon. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But the mask was no longer slipping, it was tearing apart. At the center of it all, Samuel became a local name. People began stopping him in public. Some shook his hand. Others gave him money. A few whispered words like "brave," "child of light," or "may God protect you." The radio stations replayed his recordings. Journalists sought interviews. But Samuel wasn't at peace. He was proud, yes, but he was afraid, too. Afraid the man he once called a father could still reach him. That one of the pastor's men might still be out there, waiting in the shadows. And deep inside, a question haunted him. What if Elisha walks free? Inside the CID office, Pastor Elisha had changed his tone. He requested a private meeting with the lead prosecutor. "I can make this go away," he said, sliding a folded sheet of paper across the table. The prosecutor unfolded it. It was a bank deposit slip. 10 million naira. The prosecutor looked up. "You're trying to bribe a government official?" Alicia shrugged. "I'm investing in mercy." "You're confessing?" "I'm suggesting you rethink how justice is distributed." There was silence. Then the prosecutor stood, picked up the slip, and walked out. Within minutes, 2 more officers entered the room. This time, Elisha's hands were cuffed. The press release came 2 days later. Pastor Elisha Obinna of Mount Zion Church, Ugweek, has been formally charged with conspiracy, armed robbery, attempted bribery of a public official, and obstruction of justice. Investigation continues into possible murder connections. The town erupted. Some danced. Others prayed. A few cried. The man who once laid hands to heal was now in chains. The robe of righteousness replaced by prison overalls. The spiritual father now a state defendant. And still, no one could fully explain how he had hidden it so well, for so long. 1 week later, a gathering was held at the broken gates of Mount Zion Church. Not to worship, but to reflect. Samuel stood before the crowd with a megaphone. This time, no fear in his voice. He read from a new journal, not one of pain, but of hope. "We must stop hiding behind silence," he said. "Church is not a mask. It's supposed to be a light." The crowd clapped. He closed the journal, looked at the sky, and whispered, "Amen." Have you ever looked into the eyes of a man who destroyed you, and still chosen not to hate him? The courtroom was packed. The heat inside the small Aka High Court that morning felt like judgment itself, stifling, tight, and unforgiving. Rows of wooden benches groaned under the weight of villagers, journalists, and former church members, all gathered to witness the end of a story that had shaken their faith to its core. At the front, standing stiff in a brown inmate's uniform, was Pastor Elisha Obinna, head bowed, face unreadable. It was the first day of his trial. And Samuel was there too, his first time seeing the man since that night in the office when he escaped through the window, breathless, heartbroken. Now, he sat just 2 rows from the witness stand, eyes fixed, hands sweating. The evidence unveiled. The state prosecutor rose, his voice loud and steady. He began with testimonies, victims who recounted the eerily calm leader who always quoted scriptures as he robbed. Some had wounds. Some had scars. All had stories that led, one by one, to a single name, Elisha Obinna. Then came forensic reports, bullets matched to a pistol found behind the church. Fabric threads recovered from one robbery scene that matched a shirt Elisha was once photographed wearing. And then, the journals, Samuel's pages, Obiora's maps, even old financial records showing deposits that didn't match the church's books. Every brick of holiness Elisha had built was now being torn down in front of him. Elisha speaks. After 2 days, the judge finally asked, "Mr. Obinna, do you have anything to say in your defense?" The courtroom stilled. Elisha stepped forward. His voice was soft. Hollow. Still carrying the trace of a preacher's rhythm. "I built a church," he said. "I served people. I performed miracles. I healed broken homes. And yes, I sinned." Murmurs. He went on, "I was desperate. I had loans. I had enemies. I convinced myself that what I took at night, I returned by day, in prayers, in school fees, in aid." He turned toward the courtroom gallery. His eyes met Samuel's. Just for a second. "I am not a monster," Elisha whispered. "I was a man who believed that grace could cover secrets." The room was silent. But the judge was not moved. The sentence. On the 4th day, the verdict came. guilty on 3 counts of armed robbery, 1 count of unlawful possession of a firearm, and 1 count of attempted bribery of a public officer. 22 years in prison. A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Some cried. Some clapped. Elisha didn't flinch. He simply closed his eyes. As they led him out, Samuel stood, not in triumph, but in strange, aching release. It was over. But was it? 3 weeks later, Samuel made a decision no one expected. He wrote a request to visit Pastor Elisha at the prison in Onitsha. Collins tried to stop him. "Why?" he asked. "The man tried to destroy you." Samuel simply replied, "I need to hear something with my own ears." Inside the gray stone prison, seated across a steel table, the two locked eyes once again, free boy and fallen man. "I thought you hated me," Elisha murmured. "I did," Samuel replied. "But hate is heavy. And I've carried enough." Elisha's lips trembled. "I never meant for you to see any of it. You were like a son." Samuel leaned in. "Then why did you let me believe you were God's voice, when you were also the devil's hand?" Elisha didn't answer. But his eyes filled with tears. For the first time, Samuel believed he saw real shame. Days after that visit, Samuel published a letter in the local newspaper. It read, in part, "To those hurt by the fall of a man they trusted, I understand your pain. But we must learn to separate the message from the messenger. Evil wears robes sometimes. But so does redemption. I forgive Elisha. Not because he asked, but because I must move forward without his chains around my heart." The letter was shared hundreds of times. Some called him foolish. Others called him healed. But Samuel wasn't trying to be either. He was just free. The aftermath. Mount Zion Church never reopened. The building was sold and converted into a community library. A plaque hangs at the entrance today. Knowledge keeps the wolves away. Even the ones dressed like shepherds. Collins now runs a program for abused boys, many of whom, like Samuel, were failed by trusted adults. And Samuel? He went back to school. Studied counseling. Became a youth mentor. But every Sunday, he still stands by the riverbank near his old neighborhood, watching the water flow. Not preaching. Just listening. Because sometimes, healing doesn't speak. It just waits. Epilogue, the final word. Months later, Samuel received a letter from the prison. It was from Elisha. "I dream of the church every night," it read. "I see the pulpit, the people, the lies. I pray more now than I ever did outside. Maybe one day, someone will believe I'm more than what I did. Maybe God still listens to broken men." There was no return address. Samuel folded the letter and placed it in his journal, the same one he once used to record nightmares. Now, it holds peace. Because in the end, truth had won. Have you ever found yourself questioning someone you trusted, a leader, a mentor, or a person in authority, and felt the weight of betrayal? It's a tough place to be, and we want to hear your story. How did you navigate those moments when the person you looked up to showed a very different side? This story reveals the complex truth behind a man who wore many faces. What do you think drives someone to live a double life? Can people really change, or are some secrets too deep to forgive? Share your thoughts with us. Accountability is everything, especially when those in power abuse their positions. How important do you think it is to hold such leaders responsible? What lessons can communities learn when trust is broken so deeply? Samuel's courage in speaking out came at great personal risk. Have you ever had to stand up against someone more powerful? What was that experience like for you? Your voice matters, let us know in the comments. Forgiveness isn't always easy, especially when betrayal cuts deep. What does forgiveness mean to you in such situations? Is it necessary for healing, or is it a personal journey only you can define? We'd love to hear your perspective. When a trusted figure falls, it shakes an entire community. Have you witnessed or experienced the ripple effects of such a scandal? How did your community rebuild and heal? Sharing these stories helps us all understand resilience. Young people hold incredible power to change the world. If you could give advice to anyone trying to make a difference today, what would it be? Inspire others by sharing your wisdom. If this story moved you, please tag someone who needs to hear it. Together, let's foster conversations about truth, justice, and hope. And don't forget, sharing this video helps spread awareness and encourages courage in others. Imagine yourself in Samuel's shoes. What would you do? Your thoughts could spark important discussions, so please share them below. Lastly, if you found value in this story and want to see more content that shines a light on courage and truth, please subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. It helps us keep telling stories that matter and motivates us to continue this journey together.